What's up, hockey fans? Welcome to the Wraparound, brought to you by the Hockey News and presented by Sticks.com. I'm your host, Emma Lingan. I am joined today by Michael Augello and Kelsey Surmacz, and we are coming at you on this Monday afternoon. We've got training camp right around the corner for teams all around the league, so we are going to bring you all of the latest and greatest news from around the NHL in bite-sized portions. But before we do, want to remind you all that we are brought to you by our friends at Sticks.com. Why break the bank on sticks when you can get pro-level composite sticks without the pro price tag at Sticks.com? That's Stix.com. Head over now and gear up without the markup. All right, Mike, big news of the week slash weekend. The Calgary Flames finally agreed to a 3-year, $11.3 million extension with 23-year-old RFA Connor Zary. So that's about $3.77 million annually for Zary. He was selected 24th overall in the 2020 draft. So first round pick. He had 13 goals, 27 points in 54 games last season. Then, of course, he suffered a lower body injury that sidelined him after that. But in 2 NHL seasons, he's put up 27 goals and 61 points in 117 games total. So looking at this deal, looking at what he's done for the Flames so far, Mike, do you think this is a good deal for Zary and for the Flames?
They bought some term. They gave him a little extra money. I mean, his stats in terms of goal scoring, 13 and 14 goals in his 2 seasons, are not, extremely impressive, but he's a talent. He's a former first-round pick. He plays center. He can play the wing. So, I mean, you look at the structure of the Flames, and you've got, an aging Nazem Kadri as your de facto number 1 center at 34 years old. And then you have Morgan Frost, who they brought in from Philadelphia, who's in his 20s, and I think a talented player who I think will step up and take an offensive role. But after that, really, Zary is somebody that, if they were going to play him out the middle, is somebody who will probably need to step in and score more. So if his role is expanded and his point totals go up, now they have 3 years with him locked up at a reasonable rate, and that makes sense for the Flames.
Kelsey, what do you think of this deal for an RFA deal? We've seen a few different ones get done over the course of the offseason with the changing cap landscape and all of that. What do you think? Is this a good deal for the Flames?
I think I don't think there's much risk for it per se. I do think it might be a slight overpay here, just based on the track record, and I still think he has a little bit more to prove. So we'll see how that shakes out. But I generally agree with Michael. If he does step into a larger role and he is able to put up more production and really establish himself, I think this is a deal that probably looks good for them a few years from now. So I think this is kind of a, high reward, low risk kind of signing, even if it's a bit of an overpay. So I think this is a pretty good deal for both parties here.
All right. Well, another deal, a slightly different kind of deal to talk about here. We've got the Montreal Canadiens. Just right after we had talked about it on the show a couple weeks ago, I think you and I, Mike, had talked about it. The Canadiens have traded the contract of longtime franchise goalie Carey Price to the San Jose Sharks. So obviously Price no longer playing, but it was assumed that his contract was going to be traded once the Canadiens made the final payout of his bonus. So the Canadiens also sent a 5th-round draft pick in 2026 to kind of sweeten the pot to San Jose. They also received AHL defenseman Gannon LaRocque in return. So Price now is entering the final season of his 8-year, $84 million deal. Contract has a $10.5 million cap hit, but there's just $2 million remaining in his actual salary after he received that $5.5 million bonus on Monday. So the Canadiens now have moved about $4.5 million under the NHL salary cap after making that trade. So, Mike, we've kind of touched on this before, but do you think that the Habs will use that cap space to make a big splash at the trade deadline this year, or do you think that maybe they'll save it for a rainy day?
It depends on whether they're in competition for a playoff spot. And I wrote recently for the main site that I think that the Senators and the Canadiens are two teams that could regress. They made the playoffs last year and they have talent, but sometimes when you make the playoffs, you're going to fall back a little bit. Now it's funny because Carey Price and now San Jose's got Logan Couture, who's on LTIR and he's under contract for 2 more years. He's never playing again. And Carey Price, with his contract, they're the depository for LTIR. And it doesn't matter really if the LTIR rules change with the Sharks, because more than likely the Sharks are not going to be in the mix for the playoffs, whereas the Canadiens, they are going to be. And if they are, then I think they'll spend that $4.5 million. And more than likely, as we've talked about many a time over the summer, Emma, it's going to be probably on a center, because that's where they're weak. After Nick Suzuki, they need a second line center desperately.
That they do. Kelsey, what do you think of the trade, of course, and how do you think that Montreal is going to go about allocating that cap space that they have?
Yeah, as far as the trade, I mean, I think this works out for both sides. But in terms of allocating the cap space, I think it's going to be interesting to see how teams navigate this deadline, especially with the salary cap expected to spike even more next season. So I think it'll be interesting to see if they decide to kind of save that. I agree with Michael. I think it kind of depends on where they're at come deadline. If they're in the mix, I'm sure they'll try to use up that space. If they, manage to offload a little bit of salary, there will presumably maybe be guys still like Rickard Rakell and Brian Rust from Pittsburgh Penguins available, even though they're not centers. That could add a little bit to their scoring depth. But I am more inclined to think that, if they're not like really in the mix or, in the playoff picture come deadline, they might save some of that cap space for next season when they can really make a splash, either over the offseason or by the trade deadline. Because again, I mean, I think this rising cap is going to really affect a lot of things and affect a lot of the mindset of GMs going forward, especially at trade deadlines here.
And we know that Montreal fan base is just so patient. So I'm sure that if they don't spend that money, they'll have no problem with that.
Yeah, I'm sure we won't be hearing about that at all. Yeah, will be interesting to see what happens. Like you said, Kelsey, the cap going up. This is kind of uncharted territory, not only for the teams and the GMs, but for the players and the agents as well. So really interesting to see how this all plays out. Shifting gears a little bit here, want to talk about the unfortunate news from last week. Of course, Hall of Famer Ken Dryden passed away on Friday. He had a lengthy battle with cancer. He was 78 years old. So, of course, Dryden won the Vezina Trophy 5 times. He won 6 Stanley Cups during the Canadiens dynasty in the 1970s. So, Mike, I mean, of course, this is just a tremendous loss for the hockey community at large, but how would you describe Dryden's impact on the game of hockey, and where do you think that he would rank among goaltenders all time?
Well, if you need the definition of a Renaissance man, it's Ken Dryden. And not only start with his career as a player. Played at Cornell, played in the AHL for less than a year, and then comes up in the I think it was the 71 season, plays 6 regular season games, and then wins the Conn Smythe Trophy and the Stanley Cup. Then he wins the Calder after he wins the Conn Smythe and a Stanley Cup, which is a little bizarre. He sits out an entire season because the Canadiens didn't pay him what he thought he was worth, and I think he clerked at a Toronto law firm, and then loses one round in the conference final to Buffalo in 75, and then wins 4 straight Stanley Cups. So the guy wins 6 Stanley Cups and 5 Vezina trophies. He was the color commentator for the 1980 Miracle on Ice on ABC with Al Michaels. He was a member of Parliament. He wrote possibly the greatest hockey book ever written called The Game. So, I mean, gee, what did he do in his spare time? And he was also a very effective general manager of the Toronto Maple Leafs in the late 90s. The great story is he ran into Don Meehan, the super agent, I think it was in a grocery store, and struck up a conversation with him. He represented Curtis Joseph, and that led to the Leafs signing Curtis Joseph. And then he won. He got them to 2 conference finals in 4 years. So, Ken Dryden had a major effect on the game, and it is a great loss.
Definitely. Kelsey, anything from your end to add about just the impact that Dryden had on the hockey world?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, everything that Mike said, and you brought up this thing with the Maple Leafs too. I think that's an important thing to remember. Just his stint as a GM too. But I mean, as you said, 6 Stanley Cups from this guy, 5 Vezina trophies, he had a 922 career save percentage when the league was still relatively high scoring back then. So I think this is a guy that really set the tone for everyone else that came after him. He changed the game in a fundamental way. And there's just so much history around the Montreal Canadiens franchise, and his image extends beyond hockey too. As you mentioned, he was a member of Parliament, and I think this is not only a tremendous loss for the hockey community, but also for the country. It's just a tremendous loss for everybody, and you can't underscore the impact that he had on even the modern NHL and kind of just setting the stage for all the guys that came after him.
For sure. And like you said, Mike, truly a renaissance man. I mean, what didn't he do in his life? Just truly so accomplished both on and off the ice, and definitely a big loss here. Of course, difficult to pivot after discussing a loss like that, but we are here to deliver the rest of the news from around the NHL. So we're going to do that. Going to pivot here to the Winnipeg Jets. So we know that they are now going to be without their captain, Adam Lowry, to start the season. He, of course, underwent hip surgery after the team was eliminated by the Dallas Stars in the second round of the playoffs. So Lowry at the time was given a 5 to 6 month timeline. So that would put him out until the end of October. And that's kind of a best case scenario right now. So we don't have any update, anything concrete as far as, whether he's going to meet that or not. But that's just based on what we know. He could be back around the end of October. So, Mike, how do you think the Jets are going to fare without their captain for the start of the season, especially not just the leadership of the captain, but considering that their next best center options behind him are Jonathan Toews and Vladislav Nemesnikov?
Well, I don't think they're going to rush Lowry back. I mean, if he misses, say late October, say they go into November, I think the Jets, as a team that was, had the best record in the NHL last year, can survive 5, 6, 7 weeks without Lowry, who's a very effective player, but they need him healthy for when it comes time for the postseason because he's a playoff type player. He's the guy who scored the game-winning goal in overtime against the Blues in the first round. Who's going to step in for him? Well, I mean, Jonathan Toews has won 3 Stanley Cups. He has had a long hiatus, but I think he could step in there. I don't know if he can fill the offensive role, but we know he's a fine defensive center as well. So I think, you probably could plug him in as the 2C for a little while, or the 3C, depending on whether they play Velarde up the middle, because they can do that as well. So, there's some flexibility there, but they want Lowry back 100%. And if it takes a little more time, that's the chief concern.
Yeah, I would think even with Taves, yes, he comes with the pedigree, but he also hasn't played in a few years now. And so it's a lot to ask of him. If you're gonna have him as your 2C right off the bat, after, being out of commission for so long. So Kelsey, what do you think about what do you think the Jets the prospects are for the Jets, at least at the start of this season without Lowry?
I mean, I think this is one of those situations that they're just gonna have to try to figure things out on the fly without him. Because this isn't a situation where he's gonna miss, a half the season. He's not gonna be out for most of it. So I think this is something they kind of just have to sled through. I am a little bit concerned about the fact that Taves has not played professional hockey in a few years here. So it might be a little bit of a slow start for him. And Nemesnikov can hold his own, but he's not a 1C on a contending team. So I do think, they may have a few issues down the middle. This is also kind of an aging roster, although a very good roster. So they're definitely going to miss him, but they just unfortunately don't have the cap space. They don't really have anybody in the pipeline that's going to be able to replace him at this point. So I think this is just something they're going to have to tough out and work around until he gets back. I agree that they're not going to rush him back, but they will definitely welcome him back as soon as they can get him back for sure.
Absolutely. Sticking in the Central Division here while we're at it, Minnesota Wild owner Craig Leopold said that they are, quote, not that far off in terms of an extension with Kirill Kaprizov. I first of all find this interesting that that it's an owner making these kinds of comments. Normally, you hear this from, oh, I don't know, a GM, but we have the owner of the team who that's where the money comes from. So he's the one who said that the team is not far off from an extension with Kirill Kaprizov. So he later added that their reported terms on this deal would make the contract, quote, likely the biggest in the NHL ever. So that means more than, Draisaitl. Obviously, Connor McDavid has not yet signed a new contract. We don't know what that'll be. But I mean, just looking at that statement alone, Mike, do you think that Kaprizov deserves that? Do you think he deserves to be the highest paid NHL player ever?
No. Is he a great player? Yes, he's a fantastic player. Craig Leopold obviously has not negotiated things recently because I'm sure Bill Guerin is calling him and telling him, Craig, shut up. But the problem is that you're 1 year away from unrestricted free agency, and you want this player to feel like, okay, I'm going to hit the grand slam home run. So I think you're stroking his ego a little bit to say you're going to love this contract, and if it's probably going to come close to what Draisaitl is making and what Matthews is making. And we know with the cap going up, percentage of cap, it won't be what those players are when they sign their deals. But he's a winger, and that's the other thing. If he's the highest paid winger in the league, then I mean that would be higher than Panarin, higher than Pasternak. That should be good enough, but I think he wants to set a new mark. And probably you're talking 13 and a quarter, 13.5, something like that. And, that's pretty close to being the highest paid player in the league.
Yeah, it's interesting. We talk about a lot of times these, executives kind of speaking to players through the media. So this could be an example of maybe Leopold saying, hey, Kirill, like we're going to pay you everything that you want. But again, it kind of goes against, it sort of limits their negotiating power now, especially like you said, makes Bill Guerin's job a little bit harder now. And we've still got to see what Kaprizov does this season. But I mean, Kelsey, what do you think? Just it at a basic level, do you agree or disagree that he should be the highest paid player ever in the NHL?
I'm with Mike on this one. Absolutely not. I mean, as he said, he's an elite winger in this league, but that distinction between him being a winger and a center makes a big difference. And you think about Leon Draisaitl's 14 million AAV. I mean, Leon Draisaitl has 600-point seasons under his belt. Kaprizov has 100-point season under his belt. So, this is one of those things. I agree. If he ends up being the highest paid winger in the league, I think that's reasonable, especially with the rise in cap. You mentioned the cap percentage. it's just going to be a reality that I think some of these contracts we're going to see are going to feel a little bit like a shock at first. There's going to be a little bit of shock value with some of these bigger contracts that are going to be signed here in the next couple years. But by no means should he be paid more than Leon Draisaitl. I just think that right now that's kind of absurd, to be quite frank. And Kaprizov has proven that he is one of the elite wingers in this league, if not the best winger in this league. I think there's a fair argument to be made there. But he should not be making more than some of the league's most elite centers and very best players. So I'm with you there. I'm a hard no on that. And I do think that even if he would be the highest paid player, that's not going to last very long, as we have Connor McDavid coming up. So it'll be a short-lived thing if he is the highest paid player ever.
Well, speak of the devil, Connor McDavid has been under quite a bit of, quite a bit of focus has been on him with his expiring contract. Of course, he's eligible now to sign an extension with the Oilers if he so chooses. But one comment that he made recently regarding his goals, his ambitions, his aspirations for the season has sparked some interest. He said, quote, "I want to prove that scoring 50 or 60 is not a one-off. I've had 50 goals and I've had 100 assists, and I like the goals a little bit more," end quote. So, Mike, based on that, you think McDavid gets to 60 goals this season in his contract year?
I think it's very possible. I never underestimate what Connor McDavid can do. And I think it's a reality from the fact that if you look at the Edmonton Oilers, the construction of their forward complement, he may have to score 60 goals because his wingers aren't as good. I mean, Kelsey was talking about Leon Draisaitl. Well, Draisaitl is paid as a center, but half the time when Edmonton's behind, they have to move Draisaitl up on the line with McDavid. I mean, I love Zach Hyman as a player, and Zach Hyman scoring over 50 goals may have been a one-off. He's 33 years old. He's starting to taper off offensively. You have to say that right now, a lot of pressure is on two young players being able to produce. I mean, Andrew Mangiapane is a free agent. I think he'll do fairly decently. But the Edmonton Oilers' success or failure may depend on whether Isaac Howard and Matthew Savoie are successful in the NHL. If they can play middle six winger scoring roles or power play roles. If they can't, then they haven't replaced Evander Kane. They haven't replaced Connor Brown, the guys that they lost in free agency or trade. And if that's the case, then they're not a realistic Stanley Cup contender in the Western Conference. And you have to say, if they're not, then that's the reason why McDavid is being so careful with his language, because he's not going to sign on to a sinking ship, which I think the Edmonton Oilers are.
Well, back to my original question. Kelsey, do you think Connor McDavid gets to 60 goals this year or not? Regardless of whether the Oilers are a sinking ship or not, that is certainly a topic that we have and will continue to tackle throughout the season, I am sure. But just bottom line, 60 goals for McDavid this year. What do you think?
I mean, I think it's possible. The best players always find a way. That's always been the case. I mean, you look back at Sidney Crosby, throughout the years, there was something Sidney Crosby wanted to work on and be the best at. He was working on it and he was the best at it the next season. Connor McDavid is very capable of hitting that mark, I think, if it's something that he truly chooses to focus on. And like Mike said, he might not have a choice. The Oilers are only 225,000 below the cap. They don't have too many options in terms of depth scoring. As you mentioned, Isaac Howard, Matthew Savoie, you're kind of putting a lot of reliance on those guys to be producers for you. And that's not necessarily fair for two up and coming guys. So, I think this is both out of necessity and just McDavid probably wanting to set something in motion for himself. He's never particularly been known as a goal scorer, but it's absolutely something he's capable of doing if he really chooses to focus on it. It's Connor McDavid. We're talking about someone who's going to go down as one of the greatest of all time. If he sets his mind to scoring 60 goals, I think he can score 60 goals.
Yeah, I've learned, if there's one thing I've learned, it's never bet against Connor McDavid. He will always find a way, like you said. So, uh, zooming out a little bit here, just taking big picture, looking at the league landscape for this upcoming season. So BetMGM has got their favorites for the division winners for the upcoming 2025-26 season. So for the Atlantic Division, they've got the Panthers, big surprise, at plus 155. For the Pacific, they've got Vegas at plus 150. For the Metro, Hurricanes at plus 120. And for the Central, they've got the Avalanche at plus 210. So, for one, since I spend a lot of time in the Central Division land, I am a little surprised to see Colorado over Dallas in as the favorite for the Central Division. So that's just my take on this. But overall, Mike, looking at these favorites that I've just listed, any other teams that you would potentially take to win their respective divisions?
Yeah, I mean, Colorado is a sucker's bet. They're the worst odds of the four, and like I said, I mean, I agree with you. I think Dallas should be the favorite. Maybe it's a sort of a ploy to get people to bet Dallas money. Of the three other ones, I think the one that I'm most skeptical of is Florida, simply because the regular season doesn't matter to the Florida Panthers, and they're going to be without Matthew Tkachuk for the first half of the regular season. So if they finish third in the Atlantic Division, they're fine. They're home and cooled out. All they want is that top three spot in the Atlantic, so they can play Tampa or they can play Toronto in the first round and destroy them. And they'll probably do that again because they're the Florida Panthers. I think Tampa is probably the team that should be favored in the Atlantic. If you look at the four teams, the best odds are Carolina, which means there's not a lot of respect out there for the Washington Capitals repeating what they did last year. I think people should not underestimate them because Spencer Carberry has done a fantastic job with the Caps. So if I was going to put $20 on this, I would bet against the Florida Panthers winning the Atlantic Division.
Yeah, it's a good point. We actually kind of saw that with them this past season. Once they clinched a spot in the playoffs, it was like, seeding really doesn't matter. We're in and we'll take it from there. And they certainly did. So Kelsey, what do you think of these odds? Any other teams that you would potentially pick as your favorites here?
Yeah, I agree with Mike. I'm not counting on the Panthers winning the Atlantic. As he said, it doesn't matter. As long as they squeak into the playoffs, they're good to go. I don't think that matters much to them. They're also going to be, running on fumes this season. And it's going to be pretty tough for them to give it all out, lay it out all on the line for the regular season prior to the playoffs. So I'm picking Toronto still for the Atlantic. I agree about Tampa. I think it could be either one of those teams, but I'm still picking Toronto. I also agree about Carolina with the Metro. I think there's a little bit of a separation in terms of, just the depths of these rosters. I do still think Carolina needs to add a defenseman. They still have a lot of cap space. So I do think that Carolina is still going to add to their team. I'm one of those people that are a little bit skeptical about the Capitals. I do believe that what Spencer Carberry has done with that team is pretty unbelievable. They also have a lot of, young players on the periphery of their roster that are really contributing and are building a nice foundation for them. But I don't think you can necessarily expect a repeat season by Alexander Ovechkin either. So, I'm kind of curious to see how things go for them this year. I don't think we're going to see them finish with 111 points like they did last season, but it's going to be one of those two teams. Wouldn't rule out the Devils either if they're healthy, and that's the caveat there. And I'm going Dallas or Winnipeg for the Central. I agree about Colorado. I think Winnipeg and Dallas are pretty clear-cut the two best teams in the Central. And then obviously how Winnipeg starts the season without Lowry will kind of set the tone, I think. But I still think those are the top two teams in the Central. As far as the Pacific, I'm also going Knights. I think they're pretty clear-cut the best team in the Pacific. So we'll see. But yeah, I agree. Florida Panthers don't need the regular season. They just need to make it into the playoffs. But I'm interested to see how that Metro division shakeout goes, because I think, it could go a number of ways, but I'm still betting on Carolina to add a little bit here.
All right. Well, you mentioned the Capitals, specifically Alex Ovechkin. So, speaking of Ovechkin, NHL.com is currently releasing their top 50 right wingers right now list of players. They put out their first 10 names. So, going from 50 down to 41. So, they're doing a countdown all the way to the top. But of course, Ovechkin on that list, he's number 50. And then going in order down to 41, it goes Ovechkin, Jason Robertson, Clayton Keller, Brady Tkachuk, Brandon Hagel, Jesper Bratt, Jake Gensel, Jake Sanderson, Tim Stützle, and Dylan Larkin. So that's from 50 down to 41. Mike, anyone that you'd expect to be higher on that list, or is there anyone that you'd potentially rearrange of the names that I just listed?
There are two names that sort of stand out. One is Brady Tkachuk. He had a sort of injury-plagued year, but still came within a goal of scoring 30 for the fourth straight season. And he's captain of the Senators, and he played really well at the Four Nations. The other is Hagel, who had 90 points with Tampa Bay, made Team Canada, will make the Olympic team. I think he's a very important player for that Lightning team. I'm not saying they should be in the top 10, but I think they should be higher up on the list. And if an honorable mention is Stützle, I think Stützle is a phenomenal offensive talent and probably should be in the 30s, not in the 40s.
And I realize I misspoke. It's not the top 50 wingers right now. It's the top 50 players in the NHL right now. But I think should go without saying. I mean, looking at this list, I think there's a few that I would have expected, like you said, to see Tkachuk a little bit higher, maybe even Gensel. I mean, Kelsey, what do you think of this, these, I guess, the bottom 10 on this list?
Well, first of all, I think it just speaks to how much talent's in the league right now, because you see some of these names and you're kind of scratching your head saying, well, why is this guy here? Why is Brady Tkachuk 47? Why is Alex Ovechkin at 50 when, he's 39 years old? But he had 42 goals, 44 goals in 65 games last season, 73 points. So, you look at these names, but it's kind of tough. There's so much talent in the league now, that it's kind of hard to put a separation on these guys. And I'm sure we'll come across the rest of the list, and there's always going to be names that you think should be higher, should be lower. But I would have to agree with Michael. I did expect Jake Gensel to be a little bit higher on this list. He was a really big player for Tampa last season, and especially Brandon Hagel. I think Brandon Hagel is one of the more underrated players in the game, period. He's been a good player for several years now in Tampa, and I don't think he's ever gotten the recognition that he's deserved. So I would have Brandon Hagel higher on this list. I would have Brady Tkachuk higher on this list, and maybe Jake Gensel. I'm not sure I'd have Alex Ovechkin at 50 either, but again, he's 39 years old. I know there's a lot of younger talent in the league that's kind of supplanting him at this point, but I'd still say he's a top 40 player in the league. So those would be my picks. But again, we're going to have guys on every segment of this list that should be somewhere else. So I'm curious to see what the rest of the list is going to hold for us here.
As the old guy on the panel, I scream age discrimination on the part of NHL.com for putting Ovechkin at number 50. That's a joke.
Well, perfect segue into where I want to wrap up today, talking about two of those young stars in the league that are coming in to maybe supplant guys like Alex Ovechkin. We've got two of the young Canadian stars in this league, and Connor Bedard and Macklin Celebrini. So considering they were drafted first overall 1 year apart from one another, they will likely be tied together for the entirety of their careers, just in terms of their career trajectory. So Bedard, of course, set career highs in goals. He had 23 goals and 67 points last season. So again, career highs in both categories, but his points per game dropped from 0.89 in his rookie season to 0.81 in his sophomore season. Now, not a huge drop off, but just worth noting. Meanwhile, Celebrini, as a rookie this past season, he set the Sharks rookie record for the most points in a single season. He had 63 points. So that was 25 goals, 38 assists. So slightly, I guess, number wise, goals wise, he had slightly more than Bedard. Bedard had 23, Celebrini had 25. So just looking at points overall, though, rapid fire, just first, what comes to your mind? Mike, who do you think gets more points this upcoming season? Is it going to be Celebrini or Bedard?
I think it has little to do with the two players because they're both immensely talented. But if you look at the tire fire that the Hawks are, and the fact that the main addition that they brought in was Andrei Burakovsky, who was a salary dump from Seattle, I would say Celebrini. The supporting players in San Jose are much better. And I feel a little sorry for Connor Bedard because he is a fantastic player.
Well, feel sorry for him until the Blackhawks get Gavin McKenna in the draft next year, and then you won't feel so sorry for him anymore. Kelsey, what do you think? Who gets more points this year, Celebrini or Bedard?
I'm in agreement for the same exact reason. I think Macklin Celebrini is going to get more points because of this roster. There's actually talent around him and some, mix of veteran talent and youthful talent. They did bring in Tyler Toffoli too. So, I think there's going to be more points from Celebrini this year. And just in general, I mean, I'm wildly impressed by Celebrini as a whole. He just has like a really good all-around game, and I think that's going to serve him well, and kind of ushering this roster onto the, next steps. Because I don't think San Jose is going to be a playoff team this year, but I do think they might be pretty significantly better than last season. So I think he's going to be leading the charge, and I definitely think he's going to outscore Bedard just for the talent around him. Because quite frankly, Connor Bedard doesn't have anything around him.
Well, there you have it. You heard it here first. Macklin Celebrini is going to outscore Connor Bedard this year. Heard it here on the Wraparound. That is going to do it for today's edition of the Wraparound. Thank you to everyone who tuned in to talk some hockey with us. We do appreciate it. Thank you, as always, again to Sticks.com for sponsoring us. For Michael Augello and Kelsey Surmacz, I'm Emma Lingan. This is the Wraparound, and we will see you next time.